Welcome, I'm Katrina Nguyen, and I'm here to present to you Beginning Tarot. This is just a little introduction here on Global Spiritual Studies, and I want to thank you for watching this recording, and I especially want to thank Global Spiritual Studies and Linda Morrison for making this available. So thank you, Linda. She's a wonderful producer. I really enjoy working with her, and right now I really enjoy being able to share some of the things that I like to teach my beginning students with you today, and to give you a taste and an introduction to my style and some of the things I like people to know about Tarot. And chances are you may be a very beginner, or maybe you have a little bit of experience with Tarot. And what I try to share is something that touches all different levels. So hopefully there'll be something in here for you. And towards the end of this recording, I'm going to tell you about something very special, something I have never offered before, and I've put a lot of time and energy into producing this unique recording course, and it's called Professional Tarot Consulting. And it's designed to help you not only deepen your understanding of the Tarot, but also to create an online study group where you can actually interact with people and have discussions, and then receive a certificate and also a 30-minute free, comes with the course, consultation with me about your career in Tarot. So whether you're a beginner or you're advanced and you want to learn more things, you want to learn more about my counseling skills and the ethics that I like to pass on to the students, this is the place for you. So stay tuned to the end of this so you can learn more about that and how to contact me. All right, so let's get started. This is really new, and I'm very excited about it. We've got people who have been asking me for years to do this, and I want to thank you for urging me and nudging me. Most of the time I'm kind of shy. A lot of people know me as a counselor or a consultant. Depends on what part of the country or what part of the world I'm working in. I've worked with Tarot for over 40 years, and I've been a trained psychotherapist for the last 25 some odd years, and of course it has a lot of influence in what developed my style of working with Tarot and what I'm going to pass on to you. So today, looking at this particular recording, let's explore Tarot for a moment. And these are some of the things I'd like to touch upon. First off, let's just talk about what is Tarot, right? Different people might have different understandings of what that might be. Also, we're going to look at a brief history and maybe some of the esoteric roots ever so briefly. I go into a lot more detail later on in the program. Then there's the philosophy and the wisdom of the spirit. Finally, the symbolic language, because basically that's what Tarot is, a symbolic language. We're also going to look at it as a tool for education and self-development. That's the way some of us like to work with the Tarot. And also, just very simply, for some of you who may be very new to this, the structure and the care of the cards. All right, so let's start with what is Tarot. And this is a quote that I have on my website about Tarot. I actually have a whole article there which you're welcome to read at tarotcounseling.org. Tarot is a visual, symbolic language that teaches us about and guides us through the sacred journey of our soul, through life and beyond. Now, that's just one way of trying to describe Tarot. And I'm imagining maybe you have another way that you like to describe it, maybe something you're used to, or perhaps you've had a previous teacher who's taught you something. So maybe just take a moment to think about, how would you describe Tarot? If you were running into a friend you hadn't seen in 10 years, and you wanted to tell them how excited you are about the fact that you've learned this new art, how would you describe it to them? It really is quite a challenge. And I get a real kick at seeing how different people describe Tarot. So let's look at some of these things that people use to try to describe this very vast thing. So first off, I mentioned it's a visual symbolic language. So what do I mean by that? Well, obviously the cards have pictures, and they say a picture speaks 1,000 words. So already the card is allowing us to tap into a wealth, almost like all these books behind me. You know, it's like having a library of information in just one card or an entire deck. So the moment you start studying Tarot, it's like you're learning another language. And some of us are bilingual in that way. And so, of course, some of you are probably already bilingual, so maybe you'll be trilingual. And what's so beautiful about it is that then when we meet other Tarot people, make new friends, go to conferences, and share maybe in our own communities, we have a shared language, and it's a beautiful language, and that's why I get so excited and so passionate about teaching this. Let me see. The next thing is that it's a book of wisdom. Why would I call it a book of wisdom? Well, to me, a book of wisdom is very close to other books of wisdom, whether you study something like the Bible, or perhaps you're a medical student and you have something like is the quintessential of knowledge for you and what you're studying. So it is a very condensed version of history, eons of information and wisdom and knowledge that's been passed on from one generation to the next. So the moment you pick up tarot deck, no matter what version it is, some have the symbols that represent the wisdom that's been passed on for eons, while others might have a newer motif. But even in the newer motif, if you know the history and you know what went into designing that card, you have instant access to knowledge that goes on, as far as I am concerned, to the beginning of time. So another thing is that it's a divination channel. Many of us like to use the cards to channel, whether it's intuitive or psychic, or we just use the information that we know about the card to bring this divine information to the surface. So it's an easy channel. We can pick it up at any moment and utilize it for really useful purposes. Now, closer to my heart, I think of the tarot as a mirror of your soul. And as a mirror of your soul, when the moment you do that reading or you do that meditation, that card's going to reflect back to you aspects of yourself that it's inviting you to meditate more deeply about, to get to know better. Have some of you sometimes had a card that maybe just keeps repeating and keeps showing up? It's definitely knocking on your door, and it's definitely asking you to reflect on it and not to avoid it anymore. So again, the tarot is an amazing tool as it mirrors our soul. Now, what I enjoy is also a template for life. And as I think about that, let me mention a couple of decks that really bring that to mind for me. And so the tarot itself does represent all these different aspects of life. And those are the things we'll be covering in this series of 3 recordings, which are part of the beginning knowledge class. And the first one is this introduction, the second is the major arcana, and the third is the minor arcana. And they're all on Global Spiritual Studies as recordings, or you can buy them as a bundle. But anyway, so here we're going to be looking at this template of life. And that's why the tarot can be so useful when we're using it for everyday readings, because it's going to pinpoint some area or some aspect of our life that needs more focus, or that's a place that's going to take us to the next moment or the next step of our life. All right, and then it's a malleable tool, and I have a quote here I want to share, and this is from, it's not really a quote, but it's an idea from Eleanor Greenberg, and a lot of us know her from Reader's Studio in New York, and she's an amazing, I think she's a psychologist. She's just amazing, and she says that the tarot is like a Swiss Army knife, because it's got all these different tools for different purposes. It's very malleable in that sense. It all depends on whose hand that tool is in. For instance, if you're a master woodworker, then when you pick it up, it's going to look like woodworking. If you're a master chef and you pick it up, it's going to look like a kitchen utensil, you see? So depending on who you are and what you choose to do with the deck, it matches you, and it becomes an amazing, useful tool in that sense. And last on my list, but definitely not the last in terms of interpretations, I would say that tarot is just paper, just pictures on paper. Now, of course, there's some decks that are on plastic or other things, but when I say this, I'm saying that it's a material thing, and it only has as much power as we imbue it with. When you invest your energy, your power, your attention, your time into this tool, the more you invest in it, the more powerful it becomes. Not the cards themselves, but you using them as a tool. Now, of course, there's different belief systems around that, so I just really also want to honor whatever your belief system is. So again, think about what your use is. How do you approach the tarot? Do you have a favorite skill that you like to share, or a gift perhaps you have. Some folks are psychic and they use the tarot as just a stimulus for bringing in the psychic material. So just give yourself a moment to consider that. All right. Now, ever so briefly, and this is probably going to be the briefest history lesson you ever received on the tarot because it's vast. There's volumes written about this. But, first thing I'd like to say, and by the way, this is my tarot history poster in the image here, and I've got a copy of it right here too. And what's really cool about my tarot history poster, which you can't see in that image, is that on the back it has very detailed information that takes you through time from one civilization and one time period to another. And at the end, of course, I give credit to the amazing people who've done the research to tell us about this history. So first off, just thinking about what were the first uses of divination. There was no paper or cards back then. They would use bones and they would use stones, and of course there were animal parts and a few other things that people would use back then. And of course there was this desire to communicate with the divine, and that's why we call it divination. It's communication with the divine, whatever that is for you. And there's been many spiritual influences and philosophical influences, because just like with any religion or spiritual practice or philosophy that exists today, each one has built upon the previous one. And so, for instance, maybe you can see the type in this slide, but it started with just very basic, the cradle of civilization, ancient Egypt, and of course China and India, Mesopotamia, Sumer, Babylonia, many different influences. This is something that, as long as there's been people, there's been divination. It's not a new invention. Okay, so from there, as civilizations started cultivating themselves, they started developing philosophies and religions. And so then we have spiritual roots. I hope I'm still recording. Somehow I've lost you for a moment. There we go. Okay. All right. And so with these spiritual roots, you can see there's been many influences, everything from ancient Greek philosophy to Neoplatonism, Eastern Christianity, Western Christianity, I would say Taoism and Buddhism. And those are all the things that not only influenced the tarot, but specifically influenced the major arcana, which is the next recording in this series. But if you look over on the right side of the image, that's the minor arcana. Those are the different influences. For instance, we have China in the 2nd century when they created paper. Before that, paper didn't exist. So, of course, people loved to gamble as well as do divination. So one of the first things they created were playing cards. So when you think of playing cards, that was an influence that came from China through Egypt and then the Persian dynasty of the Mamluks, and eventually made its way to Western Europe. And that's why many different divination systems work with playing cards, or they work with different other oracles that are very much based on that ancient divination tool. And so then we have basically northern Italy, where these two merge, they come together and they become what we now call the tarot deck. And that's what this image is trying to represent, is that these separate histories merge in northern Italy with Tarocchi, the first decks, and then on and it moves its way through the continent, finally makes its way to England. We have different secret societies like the Golden Dawn. From there to the main characters that most of us know about are Aleister Crowley and Arthur Edward Waite. And there the modern tarot decks sort of split off a little bit, where you have the Crowley, which is more in alignment with what the major arcana sequence was in the continental decks. But then we have the revised major arcana sequence based on the work of Waite. And then we have the spin-offs of the Waite influence decks. And the easiest way to tell that is where and what number is associated with the Strength card, which has different names in different decks, such as Lust, and where is the Justice card or the Balance card. So that's going to be a real giveaway about which one's which. And I talked very specifically and in depth about that in my program on the major arcana. All right, so that is just the quickest little history lesson I've ever given. There's so much to cover, so I don't want to leave anything out. So as I mentioned before, there's a philosophy that the Tarot is built upon that has gone from one generation to the next. There's also a wisdom that's been built up, a body of wisdom, as well as a spirit. And before we get started, I want to talk about this amazing image I have on this particular slide. And you may notice it's very similar to my Tarot history poster, which, by the way, was an image that I drew based on some alchemical research I'd been doing. And then I had one of my neighbor friends, Kahira Lynn, who's an amazing visionary artist, actually do the poster art. She just did a beautiful job. And then I came across this image. This image actually comes from a book that came out a couple of years ago. It's from Marcus Katz and Talia Goodwin, and it's called Abiding in the Sanctuary. It came out in 2011. And it is based on a book that's in the British Museum. And you'll see at the bottom there, it says the trustees of the British Museum. Arthur Edward Waite basically bequeathed this book to the British Museum. And the book itself is titled Great Symbols of the Path, Illustrations to the Ritual of the Most Holy Order of the Rosy and Golden Cross. And it was created between 1917 and 1923. And we really have to give credit to Talia Goodwin, who did the amazing research to rediscover this in the British Museum. And I had the privilege of actually touching it and looking through it and took some pictures. So even here you can see the idea of the duality and then the singularity, which we see over and over in the Tarot. And so now we're getting more deeply into the philosophy. And the first part of the philosophy that I want to talk about is this idea of as above, so below. And I imagine you've heard this term before, right? Okay, so as above, so below is most commonly associated with Hermetic texts, such as the Emerald Tablets of Hermes. I was practicing this as Trismegistus. I think it's Trismegistus. And originally it actually goes back to the Vedas from India. Thank you, India, for all your wisdom that you've passed on to us. And here's a quote. That which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, to accomplish the miracle of the one thing. And it was capitalized, the one thing. And so let's ponder that for a moment. What could be this one thing that the Hermetics were talking about and the Vedas are talking about? You probably have your own idea about that. Sometimes the one thing is called God, or the divine, or source. And in the Tarot, I even sometimes call it essence. Because the moment we get down to the essence of any archetype or card or the Tarot as a whole, we get closer and closer to source. And we'll talk about a little more of that in the next slide. So as above, so below, we as Tarot practitioners are taking this guidance, this wisdom, this energy, this vibration from above, whatever that means to you, into the below. Sometimes we're the living, breathing representation of that energy. I know for me, I tend to lean more towards living the wisdom of the Tarot rather than doing Tarot readings every day for myself. Because to me, everywhere, kind of like Enriquez, everywhere I walk, I see the Tarot. When I'm doing my counseling work, I always have Tarot wisdom in the background, in my mind. And so it's constantly teaching me about life. And so then we have this idea, the alpha and the omega, and you've probably come across that term as well. It's definitely in the Bible. And so these are this is the first and the last letter in the Greek alphabet. And for me, it represents the fool's journey through the major arcana, but also through the minor arcana as well. Because the minor arcana, as you'll learn as we go on with the other recordings in this course, is the everyday. It's like what I call the grid of life, and it teaches us about, well, how about thinking and feeling and what's going on with the physical realm, or my body, or my health, or my finances, or what about my spirit? How's my energy working in my body? So those are very interesting ways of relating to the cards. And then we have the major arcana cards, and they very clearly talk about the alpha and the omega. The alpha might be like the magician, because the magician is the number 1, and then the omega then would be the world, number 21. So we have the beginning, we have the end, and they have this dance of duality between there, which I talk in great detail in the next recording, which is on the major arcana. So I also drew this design, and I had an artist friend of mine, Rebecca Lamoth, kind of try to recreate my vision. She did a fantastic job. And so symbolically, what it's trying to tell us is that we all energy, all light comes from a source, whatever that meaning is to you. And then like this prism, and by the way, this is a special kind of prism, it's a dispersive prism, and it breaks the light into this color spectrum. And the color spectrum usually has the 7 colors like in the rainbow. And I liken that to the archetypes. It's like the first division or differentiation. And then when we pass into the minor arcana cards, that's when we get into a more diffused and mixed grid of life. But as we move closer to the omega, and we've learned these lessons of life, and we've become wiser as we get older and more experienced, we get closer back down to that essence, and again back to the archetypes, and then eventually moving even closer to source. All right, from the cradle to the grave, you might say. All right. And then I also mentioned that Tarot is a symbolic language. And one of the lessons I'd like to teach you right now is to really notice what is a symbol. I have a whole course, or I should say a whole class in the course, just on symbolism. And when you go back to the Global Spiritual Studies website, I hope you can look for that. And because symbols are like the building blocks of the tarot. So it's very important to not only know what a symbol is, which there's very diverse representations of what a symbol is and different levels, but some of the things we look for when we're working with our tarot cards is we look for things like color or numbers, shapes, objects, props, perhaps people, and then there's compositions. For instance, how are the different other objects displayed? Maybe there's also a message about the way they're composed. Focus, what direction are those objects focused, especially people? Activity. Is there movement? Is there the impression of energy going on, or is there stillness? There's also the environment, what's going on around the central image in the deck or in that card. And then there's movement, and then energy, because energy is also implied. I have a whole class just on that. So there's archetypes and complexes, and I want to tell you a little bit more about archetypes, because even though it's a common word, it has more than one meaning, especially when you look at it historically. But just going back to the tarot, when we're talking about an archetype, can you think of an archetype, one of the major arcana cards perhaps, like the Empress? What would be an archetype that goes along with the Empress? Well, it tends to be the mother. So the mother, meaning Mother Earth, as we see in this amazing alchemical drawing, or your biological mother, or we see mother throughout nature. You see the different animals here suckling, well, children in this case, but normally they would suckle their own babies. But the idea of mothering. And so the archetype is all the complex of qualifications and attributes that make up this motif or this prototype that repeats throughout nature, the world, and maybe even the universe. Now, the word itself came from Plato. It's a Platonic philosophical idea, and it represents pure forms which embody the fundamental characteristics of a thing. And then Jung borrowed that term, and he talked about the collectively inherited unconscious idea or image, usually present in individual psyches. So he's talking about, I think of it as our inner people, because, you know, you might be one way in one situation and another way in another situation. Sometimes things come up automatically from you, and some things are well cultivated. So we all have sort of like our inner people and our inner facets or aspects. So this is partly what Jung's talking about. And one of them might be your inner child. The child then would be that archetype. Now, the fourth definition is archetypes. They're constantly recurring symbol or motifs, such as in art or mythology. And so we have mythic art. And some of you may be more familiar with that. All right, so now what's really cool about Tarot Course is a tool for education, because you can, from my point of view, I'll say at least, you can never stop learning about Tarot, and Tarot will never stop teaching you about life, or even life on this earth, life in another dimension, wherever your interest is, wherever you want to go with it. I've had people ask me, do you use just one deck, or do you have a favorite deck, or do you use one for teaching, or different things like that? And the thing is, I actually use my decks often as a tool, and so it depends on what that purpose is. I might use this deck for that purpose, and then this other one for reading, and this other one for teaching. So again, not only do they teach us, but then we turn around and we can use them to teach others. One of the best ways that they teach us is that it's a cross-cultural study. And what do I mean by that? I mean a variety of things. I've already mentioned that the moment you study Tarot, you're learning another language. But now that it's a cross-cultural language, it's kind of like the, what was that stone called? That they had the 3 different languages in it. I'm going blank. But anyway, the Rosetta Stone. So once you understand Tarot, let's say you pick up another deck, and I'm going to use a couple of examples here. So let's say you pick up the Herbal Tarot deck from Michael Tierra. And I like Michael Tierra. He used to shop at my natural food store, and he's a world-renowned herbalist. But somehow he got this amazing idea to take Tarot and overlap his amazing wealth of knowledge about herbs. So each time you look at a different tarot card, it's associated with a different herb. So if you already know a lot about Tarot, it's going to open the door to understanding that herb. Or if you know a lot about herbs, it's going to open up the door to understand Tarot. Another wonderful deck that does that, and of course there's many, is the Druidcraft Tarot, and that's by Philip and Stephanie Cargome. I don't know if I said that right. And you're going to learn more about Druidism by working with their deck. It's going to have a different feel. It's going to have different symbols, different images, and that's why we have such amazing diversity of decks. In fact, I usually recommend that you start with one deck, but eventually you're going to want to spread out and try some other decks. Another deck that does a beautiful job of that is the Alchemical Tarot, and that's by Robert M. Place. If you want to learn about alchemy and these ancient symbols, that's an amazing deck. Okay, now as I mentioned before, working with the Tarot is definitely working with your intuition or working with your psychicness, and the more you work with it, the more it opens up, if you want to call it your third eye, or opens up your heart, and it just makes you more, you have more access to other dimensions or other vibrations. Those are my words for it. You may have a word for it. It opens you up to divine guidance or angels or love. Or I have one friend who works with the entities of Orion, and another person like Barbara Ann Clow who works with the Pleiades. She's a Cherokee sister. In Cherokee we say we're from the Pleiades, right? All right. And so it definitely can strengthen your intuition. And I go into that in more detail when I do my dream work class, which are, by the way, the first class in the professional Tarot consulting program is strictly just on intuition and psychic skill building. So, of course, Tarot is the perfect tool for that. In fact, sometimes I think that's why it was developed. Then, of course, it's for self-reflection and growth, and it grows with you. And it's amazing how we have more access to many tools for growth now, including this particular recording and the series that I produced. But just working with one deck, the more you get to know it, the more you grow. I love the idea, eventually, not quite yet, of being like in my 80s or 90s. I have a neighbor, Lester. He just had his birthday last week. He's 103 years old. And he's like my model. I want to be this older woman who has walked the path of Tarot for so long that we're like beautiful friends. We finish each other's sentences. And so it really can grow with you. And then finally, on a very practical level, you can create a beautiful service with your knowledge and help other people in their path and with their growth. And of course, that's one of the things I also cover in the professional program, so that we can all be the very best we can be. All right, now you might be a real beginner, and I didn't want to overlook you. And so for those of you who've just never really picked up a tarot deck, let me tell you some basics. There's 78 cards in what is considered a tarot deck. Now there's other decks out there, and they're fun and they're great to work with, but they're maybe a playing card deck with 52 cards, or they're an oracle deck, like the Lenormand Oracle, the Petite Lenormand, I should say, which has the 36 cards. You may pick up just a really fun, simple angel oracle. There's so many different oracles, and they're very useful, but what makes tarot unique is it has a very dependable structure, and that's why you can pick up just about any tarot deck and work with it. That structure includes 78 cards, sometimes a little more or less, and the 22 cards are called the major arcana, the major secrets, and they're the ones that I talk about in the next recording, which is called Sacred Journey of Your Soul through the Major Arcana. Then the 56 minor arcana cards are the four suits and very much resemble playing cards. And so, for instance, if you're used to playing cards, you know there's hearts and diamonds and spades and clubs. And so if you already know playing cards pretty well, it'll be a pretty easy shoe-in to at least getting used to the idea of the minor arcana. And then we have our people or our court cards. And I talk about that in great detail in the third recording of this beginning series, and it's the Grid of Life. So now I want to talk about some really fun ways that you can start getting familiar with your tarot deck. I'm hoping you have one. If not, I'll talk a little more about that next. But first I want you to get used to the idea of working first just with one deck, but getting to know it very, very intimately. And one way you can do that is through a daily card reading and journaling about it. And the other way that I always tell my beginning students is you want to have one book that actually goes with your deck, like it was written by the same people who created that deck, or at least it's on the same cards. Like for instance, if you're working with the Waite deck, there's thousands of books on the Waite deck, so that's easy. On the other hand, you also want, I suggest, another book written by a completely different author about either tarot in general or about your deck, but from a different point of view. All right. So that way you start realizing that there is diversity even in our understanding of tarot. So we have diversity in our decks, we have diversity in our styles, but we also have diversity in the way that we learn about tarot. And I invite you to be as diverse as possible. All right, so this is how we do our daily journaling. And this actually comes from my very first book that I wrote, and it's called Tarot Journal, Integrating the Wisdom of Tarot. And this exercise, I'm going to take you through it step by step. Maybe you want to write some notes. But the first thing you do, like I said, is you want to pick one deck. It's kind of like you're going to make a new best friend, and you want to get to know that best friend really well. So you want to put aside at least 6 months for this process. And by the end of the process, you will have written not just a journal, but a very personal book and understanding of that particular deck. So for instance, let's say you've been intimidated by working with the Thoth deck. That's the one I actually chose when I was working my own journal. I thought, I really want to know this deck so much better because it's so rich in symbolism. And so each day I would choose one card just from the major arcana. Do that for like the first 2 months. So you separate out the major from the minor cards, those 22 major cards, and then you just randomly, whatever your style, you select that one card, and that's kind of like your meditation, your thought, or your reading for the day. All right? So after you've done that for about 2 months, hopefully you've gone through most of those cards in the major arcana. If you have missed one, or it's all right to pick the one that maybe you never got, just to study it a little more. And as you go through those first 2 months, then once you feel really familiar with the major cards, go ahead and bring in the minor cards. You can mix them all up together or just do the minor by themselves. But what you're doing is building up your confidence and your skill to do a one card reading, and then you can build from there. So now let me tell you how to pick that card. This is very, very unique to me. What I invite you to do, and what I like to do at least, is when I select that card, I'm going to have it face down. And when I'm ready, when I'm focused and centered, maybe I did a meditation, I'm going to turn that card over, and I'm going to notice the first thing I notice about it. I'm going to notice if I had a feeling or a reaction, or was I drawn to one particular color or image or object in the card. And that's what I'm going to write down. That's my first impression. And basically, that's my intuition speaking. My intuition got magnetized, drawn to that one thing, and it's going to tell me something I need to know. It's at least for this exercise. And then I'm going to go to that book. I'm going to go to the book that comes with the deck, and I go, what does the book say about that thing I was looking at? For instance, I picked up, let's say if I was using this card, the Lover's card, I noticed I was drawn to that double rainbow in the background. Right? And so then I'd want to pick up the book that goes with this. By the way, this is the Voyager Tarot, and thank you, James Wanless, for the very generous use of your beautiful images. But with that double rainbow, I might go, wow, my first impression with that double rainbow was like, oh, well, you can tell I've watched television, suddenly like seeing the bubblegum twins. I'm already making associations, and so I might write down some of my intuitive associations. Well, or it could be twin flames. I might go that direction, twin flames, twins, whatever. And then I'm going to go to see what the book says about it, and that's going to add, that's like a building block to my knowledge about that card. I start with the intuitive, and then I go to my knowledge, and then I put that card aside. It'll be like on my altar for the day. So I'll put that card there, and then I walk through my day. And this is a Enrique Enriquez technique. And you go, where is this card and this lesson showing up in my day? Maybe I actually see some twins. Or maybe there's a rainbow, and I feel doubly blessed or something. Or have, for some people, they may pick up on something about a soulmate, a twin flame. So as you go through your day, it's like a walking, as I say, meditation. And then at the end of your day, you return to your journal and you reflect on where that lesson showed up in your day and what you learned about it. And so you further your learning even more. Now, after you've done this for a while, what's going to happen is you'll get more familiar, more comfortable with each of those cards. It's kind of like taking a huge 78 card deck and taking bite-sized pieces and personalizing them, making them your own in some way. And eventually you're going to create keywords that go with each of those cards. It may be your own unique keyword based on your experience and your relationship to that deck, or it could be a keyword that maybe you found in the book and it just meets you where you need, it helps you remember that card. So let me give you an example of what this looks like. All right, so this is the sample from my book. And as you can see, I put the date in there, so 4/27, in this case 2005. And then I put into the essence or the affirmation. And I just wrote what my first impression was. And I actually drew my impression of the card because it was almost, I don't have a card with this image. This is actually very much related to a vision I woke up with. So when you're drawing these things, you can draw the actual card or aspects of the card, or you can maybe write down a dream or images from your dream. Now, some people like to just paste a copy of the card in there. Again, it depends on your style. It's your journal. And so then I went in beyond the impression, and I talked about the knowledge. What did I pick up from the book? And then I went through my day, and I went, oh, wow, that's the day I actually took my favorite photo of me and my dog family. I have my two big guys and my little chihuahua in the middle. So it was a very special day for me, and that was a very special reading. And so as you do this journaling process, you're also going to create these beautiful associations, which is going to make it easier for you to remember those cards and the energy that they vibrate with or represent for you. All right, so now this is an exercise I'd like to share with you, and it's very much inspired by Mary Greer in Tarot for Yourself, which is one of the first tarot books I ever had. And what she encourages us to do is to now go back through your life, think of your life as sort of a timeline, and think of some peak moments in your life. And when you identify these key moments or these key transitions in your life, then think about one or two tarot cards that might represent that energy, or that they represent the experience or the lesson of that time. And then you put each memory and card on that timeline. And by that card, I mean you can just write down the card, or some people do really elaborate images and put copies of the cards or their own artwork, or you can do collage. Lots of fun things you can do with that. So let's think of an example. Can you think of an eventful moment in your life? I'm thinking of maybe when we were born. What tarot card might go with your birth or my birth? I'm thinking the Fool, personally. I'm thinking that fool who leaped onto this earthly plane and said, okay, I'll give it a try. So let's see what I can do, and let's see what kind of trouble I can get into. No, okay. So now, what about you now birthing something? You could be birthing a baby, or you could be birthing a project. What archetype might go along with that? Yeah, so some people might say, well, the Empress, uh, because she's the archetypal mother, and so she's birthing that new baby. And so it can work both ways. You can either choose a card and think about where that might show up in your life, like the Hanged Man. You know, have you have a hanged man moment in your life? Is there a transitional? Usually hanged man is pretty obvious. Like, for instance, when I think of the hanged man on a cultural level, when the United States and the world went through the fiscal crisis of not so long ago, a lot of people's worlds were turned upside down. They lost their home or they lost their job. But they learned new ways to survive, which for some people even reported was more meaningful for them. So in some cases, there was an amazing lesson there that maybe they're more resilient than they thought they were, or more powerful, or that more people cared about them than maybe they took the time to realize before. So again, that can work both ways, and that's a very interesting way of working with the tarot to help you identify those hot spots and those key moments. Okay, so now we're going to talk about basic care of the cards, because I think every beginning tarot student should know these things. And I want to speak a moment about this image here. I love this image. I actually took this image in Paris not too long ago, and I was having a lovely lunch with one of my Facebook tarot friends. And I don't know if I can pronounce it in French. It would be Laurent. But if I was saying Southern style, I'd say Laurent. But anyway, he's going to be gifting me with this beautiful deck, and this is an Oswald Worth, and it's his favorite deck to work with. I think I can share this, because if you look at the High Priestess, which is the third card from the top, or is it the High Priestess, they did something unusual with her. They actually put a yin yang sign in there somewhere, like a Taoist yin yang sign. You can sort of see it on the book on her lap. Typically you would see that on the chariot and on a lot of decks, or at least you see the Yoni Lingam image there on the chariot. And for him, being a Taoist, that was very important to him, and that's why he chose to work with that deck. I don't think he minds me sharing that with you. And so, talk about care of the cards. Now, many of you have probably heard of different taboos, right? So, for instance, maybe you have a feeling about this, or maybe you have a belief system about this. Is it okay for people to touch your cards? Like if you're doing a reading with someone, do you invite them to shuffle the cards, or do you just want them to tap it? Yeah, and then also I've seen books and people who recommend that you put the deck completely back in order the way it originally came. And by that I mean the major arcana and the four suits in exactly the same order numerically. And then they shuffle it every time there's a new client. So there's different taboos, and taboos just mean their habits. Sometimes there's superstitions. I do a podcast with my dear friend Gina Thies from Dallas, Texas. It's called Oracle Soup, and we have a whole show just on taboos. If you want to learn more about that, that's a free podcast. It's at oraclesoup.org. So what about a new deck? You've probably heard that, you should hold off and not buy one and wait till somebody gifts you with one. And for some of us, that is how we got our first deck. That's how I got my first deck. But it's not like I was running around looking for a deck, because back in those days, and we're talking like, let me see, that was like the very early 70s. It's not like I could just go out and get a deck. So I was very blessed for someone to give me a deck. And of course, from there on, I started looking for decks and started trying to find the deck that best fit me. And so I'd say you can give yourself that gift. And just like friends, every time you get a new deck, it's a new friend. You're creating new friendship. And sometimes you have favorites, or you have favorite activities you like to do with each one of those friends. So think of it as your friend. Now, vulnerability. Some of those taboos are based on the fact that the cards themselves are paper, which means they're vulnerable. They can tear. They can get stained. I actually have a lovely, amazing deck that somebody gifted with me. In fact, the Albano weight images that you see in any of my classes actually came from the cards I had scanned. They were the original albino. They didn't come from U.S. Games. And then after they got scanned, they accidentally got a little bit of a dye on them because I had them wrapped in a silk scarf. But the silk scarf was like this rainbow dyed fabric, and they got wet and it stained some of my cards. So be a little careful about that, because they do say it's good to wrap your cards in silk or to put them in a nice little bag or a box or keep them in their original box, because the idea is to take care of them so they're with you for a long time. I mean, there's different rituals that people do. You can put a new deck under your pillow, next to your bed, on your altar, put it under a new moon. You can do a ritual around it. You can sage it. You can put incense on it. You know, whatever works for you, whatever is your style, honor your rituals. But it may not be for everybody. So keeping an open mind and experimenting and finding what works for you. Even plastic cards, you know, there's like, I love the oh my goodness, the transparent tarot, and also the transparent oracle. They're just amazing decks, but you got to be careful with them, right? You don't want them to get too scratched up. So take good care of your decks, because you take care of them, they'll take care of you. All right. Now, cleansing. I mentioned the moon before, and ceremonies. Cleansing is something that you can do literally as well as symbolically. And so a literal cleansing means, let's say in my case, you know, I've done thousands and thousands of readings, and if you clean your deck, it'll maintain more of a slide to it, right? And what we call fanning. And if you take good care of your deck, meaning cleaning it every now and then with maybe a mild soap, a little water, drying it, damp it off, pat it off and dry it immediately, they'll last a lot longer. You won't have to replace them as often. And as you know, sometimes those decks are no longer available. Like, I have the large Voyager decks, which I'm quite used to and very happy with, and I have a surplus, so I'm not going to be running out for the rest of my life. And so you want to take care of those decks, but they'll last longer if you clean them. And then there's this thing called Magician's Fanning Powder, and I learned about that from some of my tarot friends. And that's something you can actually, after you wash them, you can kind of rub that on the surface, and it makes them more slippery again. And then I mentioned about respecting your deck, because it really is a friend. And last, I think I already mentioned the storage and creating homes. Like, I have, you can't see all my decks here, but my really special decks, each one has its own unique little bag, whether it's knitted or crocheted or woven. And so when I see that bag, it reminds me of that deck. And hey, it's that friend. All right. So now, the last thing I want to leave you with, one of the last things anyway for this class, is recommended reading. And of course, beyond reading, I'm going to recommend the Major Arcana. If you watch no other recording from me, Sacred Journey of Your Soul, there's the individual card, and then there's the series, and also I'm writing a book series on that as well. So eventually, if they're not all out already, you're going to be wanting to look at that. But I also have the webinar on Global Spiritual Studies. Now, my Tarot Journey, Integrating the Wisdom of Tarot, that one I'm going to be rewriting. Maybe it'll be available by the time you watch this recording, because I sold out on that one. And that's the journaling, where it takes you through a 6-month process. Tarot for Yourself, I mentioned Mary Greer. 78 Degrees of Wisdom from Rachel Pollack. Even if you don't have the weight deck, that is a weight-based book, but it's thick. It's so full of information, and she's just a master in trying to educate us about the depth, especially from a very Kabbalistic point of view. And then there's Pictures from the Heart, a tarot dictionary, and that's from Sandra Thompson. And what she does is she takes the symbols that you find in the cards and tells you across different decks what that symbol means. So, or if it might mean different things in different decks. So it's a really cool way for beginners to get a little more comfortable with some of those symbols. The Tarot, History, Symbolism, and Divination by Robert Place. Robert is one of those people who does amazing research. I just love everything he writes. And of course, he creates beautiful decks as well. He's quite the artist. But that is well worth having in your library. I think it's a must. And then there's Tarot Symbolism by Robert O'Neill. And That one might not be in print. I hear rumor that they're going to be printing again. If you can see back there, it's the pink book. It looks like there's a target with a person in the middle. So it's right above my flowers over there. And then Origins of the Tarot by Di Leon. It's not everybody's cup of tea because that book is about 500 pages. It took me months to read it, but it's an amazing resource in terms of some of the philosophical roots that worked their way into our modern tarot deck. Okay, and I always have more recommendations, so feel free to contact me, email me, and let me know what you're interested in, or let's be Facebook friends, and we'll just keep that dialogue going. Of course, I would love to have you in my certificate course so we can go more deeply in our learning together. And I just want to thank all these wonderful authors and artists who contributed to this particular PowerPoint presentation, this slideshow. And I've mentioned them throughout the program here. And so let me go back a moment, Linda. So on this note, I'm going to pause, and this is the end of the introduction to tarot. I hope it's been informative for you. Again, there's so much more. I'm so excited to be able to teach you more. And the next part of this presentation is going to actually teach you about some of the classes I'm going to be offering, and would love for you to join us. And it's very experiential and very interactive, which is different from your typical internet options where it's sort of a one-way communication. All right. So now I'm ready to talk about this new offering called Professional Tarot Consulting. It's got a study program for people who want to study at their own pace and are more self-directed in their study. But there's also a certificate course for those who want to work with a dynamic international group of people. And I'm going to give you more of those details as we go through the different aspects of this program. But I want to talk first about why I created it. Let me see. It was probably back in 1990. I'm trying to remember these dates. I'm not so good with dates, but I think I have a note here. So I would say roughly around 1998. I had quite a few students who had gone through my beginning classes, and they realized I've been studying this for quite a long time, so I was sort of like a little encyclopedia and a wealth of knowledge, and said, would you start teaching us more advanced classes? And so again, I meditated, I thought about it, and I went, yes. So I created basically the Transformative Tarot Counseling Certification Program, which was more in-person. People studied with me. Maybe I would go to them. Sometimes I created more of an intensive, a concentrated study. But each class was a whole workshop, a 6-hour workshop, so very involved and along the tradition that I learned as a counselor. And when I studied psychotherapy, which I've done for over 25 years now, and even when I went through my master's degree for counseling, it's very much not only about learning theory and reading, but a very important part is practicing what you've learned, practicing doing peer counseling, practicing getting supervision, doing field studies, getting supervision from your teachers, having you have a group of people who basically guide you through your learning process, and of course exams and and more reading. I can't tell. I still have all these books on psychology that I read to get through my various programs. So because I came from that tradition, I thought that is probably, for me, the best way to teach tarot. Now, it may not be the best way for different people to learn it, but it's not easy to access on the internet. And after I came out with my book, which was an introduction to transformative tarot counseling based on what I've been teaching, I got requests from all over the world, people going, can we take your program? And I'd go, well, I live in Oregon in the USA. Unless you wanted to sponsor me, which would be pretty expensive, it'd be difficult to do. So, and I couldn't find the technology on the internet to make it more accessible to people. So about a year or two ago, I came across Global Spiritual Studies and Linda Mars, and I said, this is getting so close to my vision of how I wanted to see a presentation, because you have the slideshow presentation, so you have the rich images, you can see me, you get a sense of who I am and how I would like to connect with you. But I added this other dimension, which was very important to me, and that's for people who want to get the more personalized supervision. There's an online study group, and that's what makes this program unique, because I've taken my other program, I've condensed it even further and created basically 11 different recordings. You're watching one of them right now. And it's in 2 parts. And so basically 3 ways of studying I'm going to take you through. All right. So first, let's just talk about the 3 tracks. So the first one is the Beginning Tarot Knowledge. That's the one you just initiated today. And there's 3 classes, as I mentioned before. Or if this is the first time you're seeing this, those 3 classes then. And I got my list right here because there's, like I said, there's 11 of them. So the first one is this Introduction to Tarot. The second one is a recording called Sacred Journey of the Soul through the Major Arcana, and that takes you through the Major Arcana. Then the third one is called The Grid of Life, the Minor Cards, and I have a very unique way of relating to the Minor Arcana to make it accessible, easy, and even simple to where you can pick up any deck and learn it right away. And what I do at the end of that particular class, so even if you know or you think you know quite a bit about Tarot, I still encourage you to take these other classes, because each one is based on my unique experience and my unique way of teaching, and you're going to learn things that you're not going to find in any book, or not a book that's still in print. I have, like 600 some odd, 700 books back here, so I've had plenty of time to find some real jewels, and they've influenced me as well as my own practicing and studying the Tarot and what it's taught me personally. So I do encourage you to take these beginning classes, and at the end of the Grid of Life, the Minor Arcana recording, I sum it all up in a very unique way with some amazing graphics that I created to represent the depth of Tarot and where it's drawing all this wisdom from. So I'm excited about that, and I hope you are too. The second way to study is the Professional Tarot Consulting, or I'll just call it PTC for short, program. And that's 4 units with 2 classes each. And this is really designed for people who like to study at their own pace. Maybe they're only interested in a few classes here and there. And that's fine. Each class comes with its own handouts. But for those of you who are like ready to move forward, you're serious, you want to get your practice going, you want to get your learning going, you want to take this to a great depth with some supervision and with the online support group, I recommend the PTC certificate course. And I'm going to tell you a little more about that as we go through each of these. So I've already described, the Beginning Tarot Knowledge. And so the introduction class is free. And then the second one is on the Major Arcana. And the third is on the Grid of Life, the Minor Arcana, which includes, of course, the People cards and the Pip cards, the 1 through 10s in each suit. And then with the Professional Tarot Consulting program, it's like I mentioned, there's these 4 topic units, each with 2 classes, and I'll just run you through them each. And each one actually builds upon the previous one. And so the one that's going to be the first in this particular program is called Intermediate Tarot Reading. It's going to teach you the skills that go into reading. We're going to start with that first one called Intuitive Skill Building. We're going to talk about what is intuition, what is it to be psychic, and really breaking it down to where you can recognize skills that you already possess or things that you'd like to develop further. It's very comprehensive, lots of great images. And then the spreads, telling the story, spreads, and sometimes we call them layouts. We're going to talk about counseling skills as well, and how to take your client or yourself through the story in the cards, and how to actually use different layouts for different purposes, and to be more and more comfortable and to see the diversity of layouts as well. All right, and then of course that's where we talk about things like reversals. I wait until then, because reversals are really only pertinent to when you're doing a spread and a reading. Then the second unit, developing your practice, counseling skills and ethics. That's what I'm probably known for the best. And we're going to cover, and then for those of you who go into the consulting certificate program. You're actually going to be practicing these skills with your fellow students. And I'll talk a little more about that in the next slide. But we're also going to be talking about ethics. And why are ethics important to us? Ethics are not only about boundaries and respect and things like that, but ethics also cover certain legal considerations. Is it legal for you to practice what you're doing, and what is it that you're doing, and getting more clarity about what you're doing. That's something we do with each level of the program, is get more and more clarity about what your service is and what you have to share with the world. And then of course, once you know a little more about what you want to share with the world, it naturally goes right into professional business and promotion. So okay, now that you know what your hat is and what you want to share and what you're excited and passionate about and what you're really good at and where you want to grow more, now you're ready to start presenting it in a way that it interfaces with the public so they can find you, because each one of us has medicine for the other. That's what we say in the Native American world. And my medicine may not be right for all people, right? Just like my course may not be right for all people. For those people who particularly like my skills, my style, and what I have to share are going to be attracted to me. So those are some of the things we'll be fine-tuning, and lots of reference material to in each one of these classes. So now we're going into the third unit, which is Advanced Tarot Skills. And I do mean skills because, remember, Tarot is a visual symbolic language, and it relies on the building blocks of the symbols in the cards. Those are the things that trigger us and give us immediate information. So that first class is just about symbolism, the different layers of symbols, the different applications of symbols, and then how they specifically show up in different cards and different decks. I think you'll find that that's actually, I would say, one of my most favorite classes for my students. And that's followed by dream work. And you're going, why dream work? I mean, why would you work with your dreams when you're working with tarot? Well, for those people who are developing a deeper ability to work with their intuition and psychic material, working with your dreams is also working with your intuition. And in my world, this is absolutely unique to me because I come from more of a Jungian background. I've studied process work or process-oriented psychology with the Mandels for over 25 years. That's my psychotherapeutic training. Dream work is the way I work with tarot. When I work with a tarot card and I turn it over, it's like catching a moment or a picture in a dream. And so we're really going to deepen our personal abilities of working with ourselves and working with others, the same powerful tools that we use in Jungian psychology and working with dreams. So that is very, very powerful, very potent. And then ending the program with the fourth unit, which is Advanced Tarot Metaphysics. And that's the beauty of our modern tarot decks, and working their way through Europe and eventually making their way to England and of course the rest of the world, is all these other metaphysical traditions that have been layered on to the meaning of the cards. And of course there's different traditions. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we're going to start off just talking very basically, what is astrology? You're going to learn some very easy ways and great handouts for this class for relating to different aspects of astrology, and then tying that back in with the tarot. How can I use this? How can I do an astrological tarot reading? Or how can I pick up astrological information from my cards? Or how can I tie that in with certain astrological information from my client or what's going on in this particular time frame? So lots of depth, lots of interesting things, and I try to make it easy and accessible for you. And then finally, wrapping up this whole amazing program with alchemy and Kabbalah. This will just be the bare bones because I don't want to overwhelm people, but I'm going to give you very easy ways to understand what each of these things are individually, historically, and how they apply to our journey through life, and how that's reflected in the tarot, and then how the symbols themselves show up in various tarot decks. So you'll be getting a wealth of information there, and it's going to kickstart you on the depth of your study and your practice with tarot, and I'm very excited about that. So now some of you, like I said, it might be self-directed, and it might be enough just to purchase each one of these units, or just a unit that you're interested in. Keep in mind the units are the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4. So for instance, if you're only interested in developing your practice, you're going to want unit number 2, right? Or if you're just totally curious about astrology, alchemy, and Kabbalah, you're going to be interested in number 4. But what I'm encouraging all of you to do, or those who can, is to really take advantage of this unique program I've developed, which is the Professional Tarot consulting certificate course. And what makes it absolutely different from just about anything you've ever experienced on the internet is it is experiential. It's very much about coming together with a study group. It's kind of like your pod that you go through this experience with, because the timeline is going to match working through each one of those classes. And so for each class we have, there's going to be a topic discussion. So there's going to be 8 weeks of the support group while there's 8 different classes. So each week we're going to focus on the lessons of that class. Again, there's going to be topic discussions, there'll be reading assignments, there's also supervision from me, there's exercise and diets, that means one-on-ones. Especially remember those counseling skills, very important to practice with another person before you go out into the world and practice with unknown people. Lots of inspirational resources, things that are only available for those folks who have signed up for the certificate program. And then my current library list, which is I'm constantly upgrading. So you'll get the current list, and they'll have over 1,000 titles, books, authors, magazines, DVDs, as well as decks, and not just tarot decks. I have quite a collection of other oracles. And then the certificate. This is a beautiful opportunity to really recognize your hard work and to let people know the flavor. Like if you're studying with Katrina Wynn, it's going to be a little different from if you study with the Tarot School. The Tarot School in New York and we have a beautiful relationship with each other, because if you're interested in the weight deck, they're going to tell you everything about the weight deck cards. But if you want to learn more about reading and embodying the energy and the wisdom of the cards, I'm your gal, right? And it's nice that I've had quite a few students who have combined both of those together. So you're going to get personalized certificate that actually shows your name, finished this program, and once you've completed your coursework, you also get a 30-minute life coach session with me. Now you can call it life coach, tarot coaching. Basically what my goal is to see what you've learned in the course, what your goals are, and to see how you can bring the two together in a really powerful way, and even talk about what might be your next step. Where are you growing to? And then being resourceful and kind of sending you those things, because each program, I should say each person in the program is customized to your needs. That's the beauty of having this live group. And so if one person is interested, and this happens to me in my live classes all the time, I'm going to use one person as an example. I have this lovely student who she's a hospice nurse, and she particularly wanted to work with the tarot with hospice patients. And it's interesting because around the same time I was developing my ongoing study and work using the Lenormand cards with people in coma states and people who are in hospice or passing on. And so you might have a unique interest and you can't find a program, or you can't afford maybe to go to a mentor and get that very unique specialized program for you. That's what I'm trying to do with this. I'm taking you through this vast, wonderful collection of knowledge that I think is essential to anyone who's going to be a professional reader or wants to deepen their own personal path through life. But now we're going to do the exercises, we're going to study together, and then I'm going to see what you're really good at, or you're going to show me what you're really good at, and then I'm going to start sending you more and more towards those things that support your path. And that's what I love about it, because it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of program. All right, so I ran through that ever so quickly, and I realized that I may have been speaking too quickly. And so if you want to contact me and get more information about what I'm offering in these classes, I invite you to, for instance, visit my website, tarotcounseling.org, and you'll see a wealth of articles and different services I offer, as well as my latest schedule. And usually my schedule has links to that class or more information about it. And of course, there's webinar links, and so you can link right back to Global Spiritual Studies and some of the things that are offered here. Now I also have a weblog. It's called mysacredjourney.org. You notice it doesn't say tarot because My Sacred Journey includes tarot, but it's not exclusive to tarot. So sometimes I'll write about finding your soul purpose in life and creating a mission statement and a vision statement. So all the things that I find interesting and fascinating are the things I'm going to write about and share with you. And then last, I mentioned this before perhaps, is oraclesoup.org, which is a free podcast that I produce with my sister, Gina Thies, and she's in Dallas, Texas. And that has a wealth of information based on our years and years of experience. I think we figured we had 65 or more years of experience between us. So very much invite you to listen to some of those programs because each one is topic oriented and we're just sharing our wisdom in a very casual, fun environment. We always invite your input and especially your ideas. We could definitely benefit from that. Last, here's my email. mail@tarotcounseling.org, and notice it's a very American spelling of counseling. I know some of you are from Australia and down under England, and we have these unique spellings, so I apologize. I've got the one address there. And then my phone number, I'm not always by the phone. It's a landline, but if I am, I'm more than happy to speak with you. All right. So I hope that's been helpful. If you have any technical questions about how do I get onto Global Spiritual Studies, Linda Morrison. She's a wonderful producer of these series, and she's your gal. She'll help you get registered. And just to tell you a little bit more about the registration, is when you go to the website, you'll see that some classes are bundled together and some are standalone. And so there'll be a unique price for each individual class, and then there'll be a unique price for those things that are bundled. And for those of you who are interested, and I hope you are, in the certificate program, that is bundled. It has all 8 of those classes that we just reviewed, and the online study group, and the certificate and the 30-minute consultation with me. So I hope you're as excited about this as I am. I think you can tell I'm pretty excited about this. And I hope that we can kind of follow through our tarot journey together. You know, it's like let our paths cross for a little while and see where they take us. And I'd love to see where yours go. So I hope I get to meet you. Thank you so much for your time. And I just can't wait to explore and share and grow together. Namaste.